Thrones started in the rehearsal room before I had ever joined. It started, Nat had an idea for the show and had asked me if I was available. I wasn't available at the time. She was going to do like a 3-day workshop with some actors just to try out some ideas. I wasn't available for that workshop. And the director who was, just because it's everything loops around always in a circle, was Leslie Hart. So Leslie Hart ran the workshop for 3 days, and it was just looking at Scottish identity and backhold wrestling and what it was, how the notions of being female and Scottish and wrestling all kind of came together. So I wasn't involved in that process. I came in at the next point of development, which I think Natalie had written a draft of the play. We received the play the night before. I think it was Sunday night we received the play, and we had a group of actors just to read it and go through what the play was. That play bears no resemblance whatsoever to the play that ended up on stage. And that was just sort of like, as Nat calls it, our thesis on what she thought was the themes and the things she wanted to put across. It wasn't necessarily about character journeys or who the characters were, or that wasn't quite as fleshed out in that draft. So that was a process of just what is behind, who's the characters that can tell this bit of the story, these different viewpoints that Natalie was interested in. And then we went to how do we tell the story workshop. We did a couple of days workshop, and it was during COVID, which in retrospect, I hadn't appreciated that. Obviously, how do you tell a story about wrestling during COVID when you weren't allowed actors to touch? So that was kind of weird, where people were just imagining wrestling themselves for like a day. But actors are brilliant people who will go on that journey with you. And actually, some of that ended up in the show where there's points where they're pretending to wrestle somebody and it's them in space themselves. And so it was a movement that and then we did another day with the choreographer, and then we went into actual rehearsals. So it was like 3 or 4, maybe 4 really small development days just to look at what's the story, what's the characters, how do we tell the story, and what's the physical language of the story were sort of all the things that we wanted to look at. I don't really block anything in advance. I'm not a big planner. I don't plan where actors are going to stand or move or do or anything like that. I sort of just go in the room and try and be as alert as I can be in the room and responsive to what actors are suggesting and what my thoughts are and what I think the script's telling us, and then I just let it go and we just try and literally experiment in the room, and also find a sort of way where we can be open and honest enough to go, that was terrible, let's try this another way entirely. Can we try this? That's horrible. Right, I'll take responsibility for that. Let's try it another way. But I don't ever really think I have a set process other than here's a list of all my scenes, here's a list of all my transitions, and I now need to view it like a tick list and how many do I need to get through and how quickly and how much time I think time's always is probably my biggest thing I plan, is to go, I like to make sure every actor gets at least 4 runs of the show before we hit anything technically, just so they feel safe and they feel they get a chance to find a character in the running from beginning to end, and we can get questions and note it and make it tight and slick and safe. And that's probably, and I work backwards for there and go, right, so now I've got 2 weeks, so in 2 weeks I need to achieve this. But in terms of an actual process, I've never really, I think it just finds itself depending on what it is. If it's a musical, the process might be for the first week we need to let the MD teach everybody the songs, and for the next 2 weeks we need to panic because we need to get everything ready. Or it might be we've got 6 weeks to do this play, so we can afford to sit around a table for 2 weeks and we can really dissect it on its feet and around the table and then put it in its feet. Whereas in this, it was quite a short rehearsal period, so it was really kinetic and it was really movement based. I didn't want it to feel like it was stuck at a table. So we did 2 days around the table just asking questions of the script, interrogating the script, and then tables get pushed away and it was on its feet with the full set in place, and it was just trying to stage it and make it feel as kinetic and as energetic and as it possibly could from beginning to end. When we mean that, I've got a really good open relationship, as in we're both really frank and clear and honest with each other. And also I'm a writer as well, so I kind of understand what it's like being in a room. Personally, I usually go for like day 1, day 2, and then I leave everybody alone and go, email me what you don't like or anything that's not working. But that's mainly to do with my anxiety and me wanting to get up and go, can I change that there? Say it like this. I think it should be they standing there and they should do that and they should move there. because I think as a writer you've got so much in your brain that maybe you haven't necessarily put down on the page, or certainly I don't. I try and avoid writing stage directions, so then sometimes when I watch something I go, oh, I didn't want that, I wanted this, because at the same time you don't want to limit a director by putting too many stage directions down. But in the process I thought it was really valuable, because the actors had a question about where something was coming from, or I had a question, you had somebody, Natalie was literally there to answer it. And it might have been that it was already there in the text and we've missed it. Or it might be that she needs to go and rework that line, or re-look at that monologue, or certainly for cuts, as always, every room, you know, every piece of theatre will be cut, or should be cut, because you want to keep your story as brief and as concise and as tight as possible. And so that was really helpful for points going through it, going, right, we need to maybe lose another 5 minutes, keep the pace up. Where could it go for here? Does this monologue need to go here? Could this overlap with this bit? So it was a really valuable relationship in terms of making the piece that everyone collaboratively felt really unified and happy about. There came a point where it was like, right, we've got the story, we know what the story is. I kind of said to Natalie, you can have your life back now for the next week and come back where we can surprise you and show you something. Because the other thing that I think is dead important about that relationship with the writer, particularly when it's a new piece of work, because you do more often than not have the writer at points in the room, is they're really valuable for an outside eye, because you get so caught up in what's going on in the room that actually I really also needed Natalie to go away for a bit, so that when she came back she could look at it with fresh eyes and go, yep, that's clear, I don't like what I've wrote there, can we look at that wee section, I'm not quite sure if that's telling the story clearly enough. And I think that's, for me, that's always been the best way to work with a writer, that you use them as another pair of eyes on a project, that because they know the story, but you also, and the other flip side is you want to sort of have a wee show and tell and go, haven't we all done well? Do you like that bit? Do you know what I mean? Like, here's a wee compliment here now. Do you like that bit? Do you not like that bit? Right. What bit do you like though? So it's a wee bit of both that you want to present something to a writer as well. So there's a point where I think it's really helpful and really useful. And then there's another point where the writer sort of needs to go away and let everybody else, as I always say, rear their child for a bit. And it's all that anxiety of somebody taking this thing that you've brought into the world and they're going to raise it for the next few weeks, and then you need to go back and see how it's turned out. The biggest challenge for me was, how do you make a show that's, I think it's 62 scenes, how do the transitions keep the storytelling alive without it becoming like dead space? Of how do you make it feel fluid and dynamic? And Natalie's brief always for the start is, I don't want to make a boring play. I've always kept that in my brief as well, was we are not making a boring play, which means kinetic and energy and punch in the face and keep it up and don't give the audience too much room to breathe. So for this, pace was quite a challenge, because at some points we did runs and it was like, wow, there's too much new pace, I can't take in any of the stuff that's happening. So it was trying to find the right tempo was quite a big thing. But the biggest thing for me was 62 scenes set on Highland Games fields, a chippy, outside the chippy, at a bus stop, in people's houses, at nightclubs. How do you do that really theatrically and economically and keep up tempo and exuberance and don't drop the stakes? So that was, I spent a lot of time really thinking about. There was a lot, I'm sure if you ask any of the actors, there was a lot of talk about chairs. Who moves chairs where? Who's moving the chair for this bus to this? But I mean, it's a logistical minefield. Even though there's very little props and stuff used, there was a lot of time spent in rehearsals going, that chair moves from there to there, who picks that up and gets that chair, move the bag to there, let's do it in 2 seconds. 1, 2, can we do it in 1? A lot of the time, actually, weirdly enough, was spent on transitions of scenes to make it feel dynamic and still no drop the ball. The transitions became part of the movement language as well. So I worked with Lucy on this as movement director, and so the two of us would look at how do we link it up. And I think a lot of the time blackout is the death of a scene, because you're kind of said the pulse is stopped. So for me, I always try and avoid a blackout where possible. Even if it's like in a big show like Panto where it covers a scene change, I would try and still have a narrator talking in the blackout, or a big bit of music, or something that still continues the story, because sometimes it just feels like turn the light off, turn the picture off the telescreen. You don't get it in a film, very rarely for a reason. So I always think there's a much more interesting thing if you can give the audience something to watch and something to feel and a way to continue the story, even if that's just to go, we're in a rehearsal room and a chair going like this becomes an ice bath. We're just giving them a moment to see something visual, and the lighting and the sound can take them on that journey. And so Lucy brought a load of that to it. Also, I studied in devised theatre, so I was kind of quite well versed in that stuff for my training days. I always think I don't use it, but then sometimes I go, all right, I can see where that training sort of came in, of that devised language and using movement and unspoken words and montages and stuff like that. I also think what it does as well is it gives a sort of sense of anything could happen. Whereas blackout, you sort of go, I've just to sit and wait, and then, so I get to sit back and then I need to re-engage. But I think if you're watching someone constantly, you might be going, what's going on here? And, it keeps an audience active, which I think is your job. For me anyway, that was the biggest challenge directing-wise, because it was so logistical and there was so many transitions that even at points I'd be like, what's the bus 5 transition? How do we get the chair? And that became a real, for everybody involved. There was a couple of days where we were all just literally in the room, cross-eyed and brains falling out our ears. But you get there, then it becomes, ingrained in people's bodies and stuff, and all that's there. And I think, for the actors, I think it's an interesting piece because there's some key scenes that in a traditional play, you'd have one protagonist, one story that would sort of be the backbone, and you'd see every bit of that story to its end completion. Thrones, I think, pretty different because you see moments of people's stories, but there might be massive things that have happened off stage that you don't get to see, or massive turning points, or massive leaps. So as actors, there was a lot, certainly the actors are going, how do I jump from this bit to this bit? What's happened here, and how do they need to embody that and just carry that with them story-wise. Play like this has got so many different themes, and I'd be interesting because I reckon a lot of people all have different things that they've attached to. For me, the biggest theme was, what is team? What is team, and what do we hold on to in life? And they were the two things that, for me, why I loved the backhold wrestling metaphor, because I was like, I think as people, we hold on to stuff for far too long, and we're terrified of being thrown to the ground, so we just hold on, and we keep holding on tight in the hope that nobody chucks us or throws us. I deliberately never had a conversation with the actors about what's the theme of the play, because I felt like everybody's character's in such a different journey that I didn't want to dilute what they thought the theme of the play was, and I didn't want to put my idea of the theme onto them either, that I wanted them to sort of embed what they think the story is they're telling, because their character's telling a completely different storyline. But for me, it was about what is team, and I know for Natalie, it's definitely about what is Scottishness. But I kind of went bigger than that. For my theme, I felt it was much more about what is team. How do we be in the same place and exist in the same place, even if we don't like, or even if we don't hugely respect at points each other? How can we still storytell or fight for each other, or stand in the same space together with some sort of solidarity and shared viewpoint? So that to me is for Throne is what I felt was the main backbone. It's interesting because I think that theme's really spelled out clearly at the end. Like, Mo's character at the end really says it clearly. And even in the development, even though that script for the very first development changed loads, the very final speech about standing in a patch of grass, it's just a patch of grass, but the land holds the story, that's always existed. And I think that was the second speech. In the first development, I remember saying to Natalie, I think that's what the play's about, is about the power of land, and land holds stories, and how do we tell stories, and why do we tell stories, and that, going, oh, that's interesting, I never felt like that was what, but for me, that big final 5-10 minute section really speaks to that theme. It's sort of, for me, it's there the whole way through it. Even in the visual of the 5 of them sitting in their chairs at the start, there's a visual of them all doing the same, the WWF fight is the first thing, and then the next thing is them on the same space at the gym hall, then all sitting up the back in their chairs, all sitting in a bus. There's loads of moments all the way through it, that visual keys that are sort of like, here's a group of people existing in the same space. Even if they're at the bus stop, the other 3 are still sitting there. Nobody gets to leave the space at any point. once they're on their own. So even like directing it wise, I always knew as soon as they start, they don't get to leave because they need to share the same space and the same patch of grass and the same land from beginning to end. Even if they're no facilitating in one another's stories, they still need to exist. So thematically, I suppose it's there the whole way through it. And also the other thing as well is that thing of them staying in is also that they bear witness to everybody's stories, even if it doesn't look like they're listening, they're all there to sort of hear one another's monologues and speeches and stuff. So that's, yeah, that felt like an important directorial choice. It just, a bit like the blackout thing, I didn't want that thing where actors disappear and there's 2 people at a bus stop and then another 3 come on. That didn't feel like that type of show. It didn't feel like that type of storytelling in this instance. And then off that, there's loads of different themes about race, gender, sexuality, motherhood. I think there's loads of themes that shoot off of that, but for me, I felt the backbone was always like, what is team? How do we exist in the same space? What I also love about when you work in theatre and you work with a set designer is they bring stuff to the table that you haven't thought of. The only thing I sort of discovered in the development is it was really nice. I think it was maybe the second last or the last development we did. I really liked there being audience on all 3 sides because it felt like a different type of storytelling. It felt a bit poorer theatre, like a less constructed image, and much more about how perspective was also another thing. I quite liked that as an audience you would have a different perspective depending where you sat, and actually as an audience member the text gives you different perspectives the whole way through it. I like that. One of the things I had is that, and actually I'll be really honest, and 3 times I said I didn't want to direct it because I felt it should be directed by a female. Every time I went into development with it, and I was really honest with that, and I said I feel this should be directed by a female, and I feel it should probably be a female of colour, a director of colour, because of the material that's in it. And Natalie was quite adamant that she was going, well, I'm a female of colour, so I'm bringing that to the table. I want the right person to tell the story, and I don't think that needs to be gendered, and I don't think it needs to be based on race, and I feel that there'll be enough people in the room, and how we make up the team will dictate that to make sure we still have a diverse team across the board. And so one of the things I was very aware of is I didn't want to direct a piece that had an end-on image that I could make my gaze, and what I felt was how I wanted it to look to an audience would be really fixed and set, whereas if I put it in 3 sides, it would have a bit more fluidity to it, and I wouldn't be able to control it in the same way. It wouldn't be a fixed, static image. It would sort of live and breathe in a different way. So I took that idea of 3 sides, potentially 4, to Karen, who was, I've worked with in quite a few projects before, Karen Tennant, who's a set designer. And Karen came back with, there's massive challenges putting it in 3 sides in terms of audience capacity, technically, sightlines, which I never really thought about at the time, but I had to think about quite a lot in rehearsals. And it was Karen that came back with the idea of the gym hall, because it made her think of what do the gym halls look like, and kind of obstacles, and a kind of nostalgic feel, and I just loved it because it really framed it beautifully. Yeah, and it just sort of developed for there. And then, of course, we go, where do props live? How do we store props? We had to find that in the room. We were like, there's nowhere to put anything. No, where do we put it? And so we had to find wee ducats and spaces and stuff where things could live and all that, so that it didn't become go off and get a prop, because I was like, nobody can leave the space. It doesn't look right. Well, first of all, I'd like us to have done what Natalie always set out to do, which was, this is not a boring play. That's the main takeaway, thou shalt not bore. What I would love an audience to take away is that they felt exhilarated, and a sense of fun, and a sense of really being made to think. I'd love nothing better when you make a piece of theatre and an audience goes away still thinking about it, whether it's trying to grasp it intellectually or emotionally or even comedically. I like the feeling that when you leave a seat in the theatre, you take a bit of that theatre still with you into the world. That's the only reason I work in theatre, because I think that's the most magical thing about it, is that you leave your seat and you take a little bit of that way and you keep it with you. So I'd love that.